Call the meeting to order. Review of the agenda. Are there, again, this is for the organizational meeting. So if there are any requests to add or add anything to the agenda, for the most part, we need to maintain things in the order that they're in. But if there's any request to add anything, Sarah, I see a note.
I would like to not add anything, but to edit item number 5, that should say appoint finance committee members. We do not elect our finance committee members per the confirmation in the charge that was amended in 2019. So the chair does appoint the finance committee members. So that should just say appoint, not elect.
Got it. Okay, so quick procedural clarification on that. Great. Any other points of clarification from the commissioners? Okay, none at this time. Great. I want to take a moment to welcome 2 new board members. So we have an alternate for the city of Winooski. And a new commissioner for Williston. So, why don't we start off by giving you a chance to introduce yourselves, give us a little idea of your background, your knowledge of materials management, anything that you would like to share with the board would be great.
I'll go ahead and start if that's okay. My name is Dr. Ron Stotine. That's the way I'm listed on the list of commissioners, but I hasten to point out that I am not a medical doctor. I have a PhD in journalism, and I'm retired, former associate professor of broadcasting and mass media, and a former broadcast journalist in radio and television. Currently trying to write a second novel, and it's going fairly well. The first novel was called The Chechen's Revenge. And if you want to talk to me at some time later, I'll be delighted to tell you about it.
Great. Thanks, Ron. And do you have any knowledge or background in materials management, waste management at all?
I do not really. I have been a manager in the broadcast industry. So I'm comfortable with working with volunteers because I was the general manager of several college radio stations and staffed always by student volunteers. So, I have that kind of expertise that I can bring to the party. But other than personal attempts to do composting and recycling, that would be about the extent of my knowledge.
We're excited to have you join us, Ron. Thank you. And Kelton, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
Yep, thank you. So my name is Kelton Bogaski, new representative from Williston. I've been on the calls for the past 2 years and even before when we were in person. So I've definitely met some of you before. I currently work for Casella Waste. I'm an outside sales rep for them. So I work with our customers throughout Chittenden County. That's my background. My expertise in material management. I think I definitely, what's nice is I do get to talk to a lot of different constituents that use the facilities in Chittenden County, and struggle with different types of materials and special recycling that currently isn't offered anywhere in Chittenden County. So I feel like I kind of have the ear to the ground and get to work just in a different note with CSWD and different projects. Like right now I'm working with Ethan Hausman on a film plastic recycle pilot for downtown Burlington, which is hopefully going to start very soon. It's been 4 or 5 years in the planning. So that's my background. Super excited to join the board and hopefully bring some of what I hear and what I see from working with different business owners and residents in Chittenden County.
Great. Thank you, Kelton. We're happy to have you join for Williston. So next on the agenda is the executive board and granting of authority.
Nope, actually the first one is to elect the officers.
I was jumping ahead.
You didn't want to leave.
It was bold. The bold number 4 just caught my eye with these glasses on, not wearing my contacts. Yes, election of officers, most exciting element of the evening. And Sarah, happy to have you, your assistants walk through this.
Sure. So in the board packet, there you have a memo that shows who had either sent in a self-nomination or was nominated for the officers and for the executive board. So what we'll do is we will vote one by one. If there are additional nominations from the floor, we'll take those nominations. When those nominations are considered to be complete, there will be a motion to close the nominations. And again, we'll do that for each officer in turn. If there are multiple people who are running for each office, we will, Amy will send out a separate invitation for a separate Zoom meeting, and we will call each community into that Zoom meeting one by one. You will let Amy know your vote as the secretary of the board. Amy is the secretary of the board. She will record that. You will leave that meeting, come back to this meeting, and then we'll go one by one. But that's only if there are additional nominations from the floor at this time. So, Brian, if you would like to ask for additional nominations for the position of chair, we can do that one first.
Yeah. So we'll begin with the chair, and then we'll move on to the other officer seats as Sarah outlined. So at this time, if there are any additional self-nominations, or anybody has discussed with somebody else on the board previously that would like to nominate and have an acceptance of a nomination, now is the opportunity to do so. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to close nominations for chair.
I move we close the nominations for chair. Essex.
Second, South Burlington.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And if you are not on camera, I want to make sure we have enough indication, either from a raise a hand or from coming on camera, to indicate your vote. Perfect.
I don't have a camera on this computer.
Okay, a hand works, Leslie.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so it seems like all those in favor for closing chair position. So Sarah, will take the nominations for the remaining officers, or will we vote on the chair first?
We'll vote on the chair first.
Okay. So all those in favor of the nominee for chair, that being Paul Roos. Do we need a second for that, or Sarah?
No. So the official motion would be, you are, as the chair, would be calling the question. All those in favor of Paul Roos acting as chair indicate by saying aye and or raising a hand.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? Paul, welcome to the chair position.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking on the role.
I guess before we go on to the next vote, I wanted to take a point of privilege on behalf of the entire CSWD board to thank you for your exceptional leadership that you provided this last year, and also your contribution in the years leading up to this. You stepped into the board chair position, was suddenly vacant. You brought a tremendous amount of knowledge and energy and enthusiasm, an absolutely amazing ability to run a meeting via Zoom. You are an extremely hard act to follow, but again, thank you for your year of leadership, and on behalf of the whole board, we are delighted that you're going to continue to be with us and make another continuing strong contribution to CSWD. So thank you very much.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Cheers. Thank you.
I will give you the opportunity to take the baton if you would like, Paul, or I can continue on to close out the board elections if you would like.
I'm prepared to take it over. I think probably it makes more sense since I think you're now officially retired and I'm officially
I'm happy to
installed.
pass the baton. It's all
Okay.
yours.
And everybody, please bear with me as I get my legs under me for running a meeting. The next item will be the election of the vice president of the board. You've already asked if there are any other nominations for any of these positions. The only self-nomination is Alan Nye of Essex. Do we have anybody move to close nominations?
Close the nomination.
Close the nominations. We need a motion to do that.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion on the motion? There being none, all those in favor of electing Alan Nye as vice chair of the CSWD board, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
First,
Aye.
Aye.
we need to back up a moment. We need to first approve the closing of the nominations, and then we can move to the vote. So first, actually,
Sorry.
we're voting to, that's okay, closing the nomination.
Those in favor of closing the nominations, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Now, are we ready to vote on the election of Alan Nye of Essex as vice chair of the CSWD board? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody voting no? Any abstentions?
Yes, Essex.
So thank you, Alan. You are elected again as the vice chair. Thank you very much for being willing to continue in that role.
Thank you.
The next position to consider is the role of secretary of the CSWD board. Amy Jewell is the only nominee we have so far. We have no other self-nominations. I'll entertain a motion then to close the nominations.
So moved.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. I just point out that the CSWD charter does allow for a non-commissioner, someone who is not a commissioner, to serve in the role as secretary. It's also possible to do that as treasurer. For the past several years, Amy has performed the role as secretary of the board. So this is entirely within keeping of our charter. That said, all those in favor of electing Amy Jewell as secretary of the board, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Any voting no? Any abstentions? Thank you, Amy. You'll continue as our secretary for the coming year. The next position to vote on is treasurer. Leslie Nolte of Jericho has self-nominated. There are no other nominations been brought forward, so I'll entertain a motion then to close nominations.
So moved, Essex.
Second, Burlington.
Assuming there is no discussion on the closing of the nomination, all those in favor, raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed to closing nominations? Abstentions? Nominations are closed. Now we'll move to the actual vote on Leslie Nolte of Jericho being treasurer of the board for the coming year. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Leslie and Jericho.
That is noted. I call the election for Leslie Nolte of Jericho as our treasurer for the coming year. Thank you very much, Leslie. That closes the election of officers at this organizational meeting. The next item is item 4, elect to the executive board and granting of authority. Sarah, perhaps you could walk us through that.
Sure. So the executive board is the only other elected group. All of the other committees are appointed. And the executive board has been granted certain authorities by the full board, such as approval of expenditures up to $100,000. And they are able to act in place of the full board in emergencies, things of that nature. So we do elect 4 positions. The chair is automatically a member of the board. So you will be electing tonight 4 members to sit at that on that board. And the nominees, and again, the officers aren't automatically members, just the chair is automatically a member. So the 4 that we have who have self-nominated are Alan Nye, Leslie Nolte, Lee Perry of Burlington, and Paul Stabler of South Burlington. And at this point, Paul, I think you could entertain additional nominations from the floor if there are any.
Thank you. Are there any additional nominations from the floor for the executive board? Hearing none, I'm ready to entertain a motion then to close nominations for the executive board.
So moved.
Move that. Second from Milton.
Thank you. Any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor of closing the nominations for the executive board, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
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 We're now ready to take a vote on electing the executive board, which will include Alan Nye of Essex and Essex Junction, Leslie Nolte of Jericho, Lee Perry of Burlington, and Paul Stabler of South Burlington. We have a motion to elect that slate of candidates.
So moved,
moved.
Jericho.
Second, Liz from Colchester.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this motion? There being none, all those in favor of electing the executive board consisting of Alan Nye, Leslie Nolte, Lee Perry, and Paul Stabler, please signify by saying aye or by raising your hand.
Aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yes, Essex.
Thank you, Alan. The ayes have it, and the executive board is elected. The next.
Well, we have
Sorry,
two motions necessary for the official granting of authority to the executive board and the executive director. And if you like, I can read those motions and
Yes.
pass them. So the first motion is to authorize the executive board to approve expenditures up to $100,000.
Essex, so moved.
Second,
second.
Jericho.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this this motion? I take it this is a longstanding amount that's been in place, certainly for the past several years.
That's correct.
Yeah, it was at 50,000 at one point. In the last few years ago, we raised it to 100,000. I think it was, right, Sarah?
It's been at least 5 years. It was 100,000 when I came on board.
Yeah.
But you're correct, Paul.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion on this motion?
I would
All
wonder, just a question, is 100,000 an adequate number at the present time?
My opinion is yes, it is. It doesn't need to be higher.
And I would say that it, from my experience as the chair this past year and on the finance committee the previous year, that it is sufficient.
Okay, thanks.
It's a great question. Thank you,
Good
Ron.
question. So we're now ready to vote on this motion to authorize the executive board to approve expenditures of up to $100,000. All those in favor signify by saying aye or by raising your hand.
Aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries.
Well, the next motion is to authorize the executive director to expend up to $50,000.
I have a motion to approve.
So
Anybody
moved.
who? Thank you,
Second,
Leslie.
Burlington.
Thank you. And again, this is, or any discussion on this motion? Again, this is a longstanding practice, and this $50,000 amount has been in place for no doubt several years.
Yes, this was increased, I believe, in 2017.
Sarah, have you had an occasion to invoke this authority?
Essentially, it's for any contract that has a value of up to 50,000. So yes, this is regularly put in place. Prior, it was 25,000, which required us to bring lots of routine, regular contract approvals to the executive board. And it got fairly cumbersome. So we requested the increase of 50,000, and that has certainly decreased the amount of routine contracts that need to come to the executive board.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on this motion? All right, then, all those in favor of authorizing the executive director to expend up to $50,000, please signify by saying aye or by raising your hand.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Item 5 is the appointment of the Finance Committee members. As Sarah had clarified at the beginning of the meeting, it's not an election. It is an appointment made by the chair of the board. That would be me. My understanding is that we have 3 self-nominations that were received by the time the self-nomination closing date had arrived. And those self-nominations are Leslie Nolte of Jericho, who was automatically a Finance Committee member, I believe, by virtue of her being treasurer of the CSWD, Tim Laux of Shelburne, and John Gifford of Milton. Are there any other self-nominations coming from the group today?
I'd like to self-nominate myself, Kelton Bogaski of Williston.
Thank you, Kelton. Since this is my prerogative to make the appointments, I want to go ahead and appoint Leslie, Tim, and John. Kelton, I appreciate your interest and willingness to serve on the Finance Committee. You're certainly welcome, as are all board members, to participate in the Finance Committee meetings. And I think, as Bryn has pointed out in the past, it is an excellent way to learn about the inner workings, the financial workings of the CSWD, and it is a great groundwork preparation. I was on the Finance Committee this past year, so I guess that's maybe that's a testament to just how wonderful the experience can be. Watch out, Kelton. Your number might be coming up sometime to become chair of the board.
Paul, this is John Gifford. If it would help, you can put him in my place. I don't need to do it.
Well, my understanding, John, is you've got a finance background, treasurer of Milton in the past. Is that correct?
Currently. I'm currently the treasurer of Milton. And yeah, I've been a school business manager for 25 years. So yeah, I have some background.
You've asked some very good, pertinent questions over the past year. So I think you'd be a real valuable asset to the Finance Committee. So I'd like you to be on there.
Fine.
Thank you very much.
If it would help, the guy, fine.
Okay. Thank you, John. Sarah, that is, we're now done with item number 5.
Correct. That's right. We're on to number 6.
Item number 6 is setting the meeting schedule. which was in the packet.
Yep.
Um,
Oh, I have a motion if you'd like me to read it.
Yes, please.
Motion to set the meeting schedule as presented for the Executive Board and the Board of Commissioners, and further to authorize the Chair of the CSWD Board of Commissioners in consultation with the Executive Director to cancel Board of Commissioner and Executive Board meetings when it is deemed unnecessary or imprudent to hold a meeting.
So moved.
Make that motion. This is John Gifford.
We had a lot of people making the motion. I don't know, Amy, if you got the recording of who that might be, but
I did.
thank you, John. And who was the second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Leslie. The schedule is presented in the meeting packet. I don't know if there are any questions or observations they want to make on it. This is pretty much the same sort of schedule that we followed in the past.
Ron?
Just wondering, is July deliberately a holiday month?
It's traditionally been one of the months that we do take off. It's usually either July or August, and it has tended to be more often than not July.
Okay, just wondering.
Mhm.
Any other questions on this motion to set the calendar as presented in the board packet? There being none, all those in favor of adopting this calendar, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The calendar is adopted. Item number 7 is to set the interest rate for late payment. Sarah, I'm going to ask you to talk to this, please.
You bet. So this is the interest rate that we would set to our member towns if we were to issue an assessment to the towns and they were late in paying that assessment. So this amount has not changed in many, many, many years, nor has it been needed because we have not made any assessments to our member towns. But it is something that we are required to set by our charter. And I do have a motion I can read, Paul.
Please.
Motion to set the interest rate for late payment at 1% per month, 12% per annum for member towns if assessments are established.
So moved.
Thank you, Leslie. A second?
Jericho?
Second, Burlington.
Thank you, Lee. Is there any discussion on this motion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The interest rate is set. Item number 8 is the continuation of the fidelity bond for officers.
And this is another requirement of our charter that we have essentially officer and directors insurance for the executives and for the executive director, for the officers and executive director.
Could you read the motion?
Yes, motion to continue the fidelity bond of $500,000 per incident for commissioners of the Chittenden Solid Waste District, the Director of Finance, and the Executive Director.
We have a motion to approve.
So moved, Jericho.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Yeah, this is John Gifford. I'd like to ask why we do this as a board motion. If it's written into the charter, wouldn't it automatically happen?
It has to be confirmed each year. And I think it may even be, I'm not sure, Nola, if you are familiar, it may be a requirement of our auditors that the board formally adopts and recognizes and confirms that the bond is in place.
And I don't think the amount of money is identified
Right.
in the charter.
True.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, that makes sense then. Okay.
Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of continuing the fidelity bond of $500,000 per incident for the commissioners of the Chittenden Solid Waste District, the Director of Finance, and the Executive Director, please signify by saying aye or by raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We're now on to item number 9, the approval of check signing privileges.
And this one is pretty straightforward. And we needed to have this in place during pandemic to ensure that we were able to continue to process checks. So this is strictly to have 2 officers on our bank accounts who also have the authority to basically to spend money on behalf of the district. So it is to, again, authorize myself and Amy as the Director of Administration. We've been traditionally the roles within the district to have check signing authority, as is the treasurer and the chair.
Thank you. Could you read the motion?
Certainly. Motion to authorize the chair of the Board of Commissioners, the executive director, the Director of Administration, and the treasurer to sign checks and electronic transfers throughout the upcoming year, and further, any check or electronic transfer greater than $25,000 shall need 2 signatures.
So moved, Essex.
Seconded,
Thank you,
Wilson.
Ron. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or question on this motion?
I would just like to say that as treasurer, I've never been asked to sign a check. This is pretty much a pro forma procedural motion.
This is John Gifford. Sarah, when a set of board orders comes up and we're talking about individual checks inside the set of board orders, right?
Correct, inside the warrant, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? All those then in favor of authorizing the chair of the Board of Commissioners, the executive director, the Director of Administration, and the treasurer to sign checks and electronic fund transfers through the upcoming year, provided that any check electronic transfer greater than 25,000 shall need 2 signatures. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Zane, Jericho,
Thank you, Leslie. The motion carries. I believe there is no other business to be conducted at this organizational meeting, so entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moves up, Burlington.
Thank you. Do we
second,
have
Jericho,
all those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
aye.
I trust there is no one voting no or abstaining. We are adjourned. So we're now ready to move to the regular Chittenden Solid Waste District meeting for June 23rd, 2021. I guess we'll roll right into this. It looks like potentially a long agenda, and it's a hot summer evening, at least it is in this office. So we'll move right ahead. I believe a quorum is present, so I will call this meeting to order. The first item is the agenda. Are there any changes, corrections, clarifications on the agenda?
Oh, I have 2
Sarah.
clarifications and corrections. On item number 5, the board action requested should read approve project launch. It's missing the word launch. And on number 6, Amy, I believe that there actually is no board action needed. Is that correct? Okay. So this is just a discussion only item number 6.
Thank you. I hope all the board members are clear on the changes to those 2 agenda items. They're both very important to understand. Any other changes to the agenda as presented? There being none, then the agenda is accepted as clarified by Sarah. Item number 2, the public comment period. Are there any members of the public present in the meeting that would like to address items that are not going to come up in tonight's agenda?
Well, I'm not seeing any hands raised or anything in the chat.
Okay. Hearing no interest from the public on commenting on tonight's meeting, we'll move on to the consent agenda. All these items have been in the board packet. Are there any items that a board member would like to remove from the consent agenda? There being none, the consent agenda is approved as presented to the board. Moving on to item number 4, conflict of interest policy revisions. Sarah, I'll turn this over to you.
And I have enabled Thomas Maloney, District Attorney, also to be able to comment on this. So we've actually had a conflict of interest policy for quite some time. It was revised several years ago as well. Just about a year or so ago, the state legislature required all boards and commissions to have a conflict of interest policy. So there's been a lot of organizations and boards looking at the policies, of their policies if they didn't have one, and then looking at them to refine them. So that's what we're doing here tonight. We have identified some potential gaps. We also wanted to kind of remove the his/her and make the pronouns neutral. We'll be doing that throughout our policies as well. So through the year, you'll be seeing some of those revisions coming across your desks, your virtual desks, to modernize that language. So and again, Thomas, please do jump in here. What we're talking about here is further clarifying what can be considered conflict of interest, and then allowing for the chair and vice chair and the executive director to kind of pre-identify materials that may be considered confidential or should otherwise be exempt. And if there is a conflict that the 3 people known as authorized persons, so the chair, the vice chair, and the executive director, feel would be a conflict, to have the ability to not distribute those confidential materials to a member that would likely have a conflict of interest. So it was clear in the policy where a member would need to self-identify having a potential conflict of interest, would recuse themselves from the vote and from the discussion. What was not clear was the authority or the ability to withhold potentially sensitive documents from a member who may have a potential conflict, whether self-identified or identified by these authorized persons. Thomas, I don't know if you want to clarify anything else with the changes that are being recommended.
Certainly, just as a by way of background for the commissioners, state law, several years ago adopted policies, or state law was changed to provide that municipalities do have the power to address conflicts of interest as an ethical matter. And then recently, the Vermont legislature changed the law to actually effective as of July 1, 2019, to require that every municipality or every town, city, and village within the state was required to vote and adopt a conflict of interest policy unless by their legislative body they had previously enacted and adopted a conflict policy. And conflict policies require them to identify those officers, in this case, the Board of Commissioners and officers, as well as staff members as well, who's covered by the prohibition, the method for people to identify what the conflict is, and a definition of conflict as being one as either a direct or pecuniary interest of the official or their spouse, a household member, a business associate, an employer or employee that has an interest in the outcome of a cause proceeding, an application, or any other matter pending before the public body. And so, that I think just shows that the state legislature was really encouraging municipalities to take steps to provide for conflict, so that we all recognize that public officials have their constitutional duty and responsibility to serve the interest in their capacity as a public official. So that I think is what was making edits and improvements and updates to address conflicts, primarily for committee members as well as the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you for that background. Sarah, do you have anything else to add at the moment?
At the moment, I'm very interested in feedback from the board.
Yeah, I will say that every member community that is a member of the district does have a conflict of interest policy. Many are very similar. Some are have different focus. But you all, as appointed officials on behalf of your member municipality, you do have a conflict of interest policy that is applicable to you. So.
I think it's appropriate, before we open this up for questioning by the board, that we actually have a motion to put this on the floor of the table for discussion. Would anybody care to make that motion, or do you have language, Sarah, to move this forward?
That is a great question. I forgot to write a motion for you. So Paul, do you generally we would entertain discussion after a motion to adopt the amendment? Is that how you would like to proceed? Or do you
That's the way I'd like to do it. I think I can come up with wording as entertain a motion to adopt the changes to the First Amendment of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Policy of the CSWD as presented in the June 23rd, 2021 board packet. That would be my language for the motion, and I'd entertain somebody to make that motion.
So
if I may interject, apologies. This is the amendment. I think the changes that are highlighted were changes to an earlier draft of the amendment. So if the motion would be to adopt the amendments to the conflict of interest policy for the Chittenden Solid Waste District.
Thank you for clarification.
Question. This is John. Do we have to have more than one reading of a policy before it's adopted?
I would have to defer to a parliamentarian at this point.
No.
Okay.
No.
So to be clear, the proposed motion is to adopt this proposed amendment to the conflict of interest policy.
I think Ron already did that.
Ron moved it?
Well,
Ron did move it.
I did, yes.
Ron can't move it as the alternate because Bryn is in attendance.
Then I'll move it. This was John.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second?
Second, Winooski.
Thank you. Now we'll open this up for questions and discussions from the board.
I have a question for Thomas as a point of clarification. So piggybacking on your indication that all member municipalities have their own conflict of interest, does the CSWD conflict of interest hold in place or have jurisdiction over the member municipalities' conflict of interest?
I think both apply. that as with yourself as a commissioner representing the city of Winooski, you have those policies to which you need to conform your behavior in your capacity as an appointed official on behalf of the city of Winooski. Similarly, as you're addressing and working on Chittenden Solid Waste District matters as a commissioner, you need to abide by the conflict policy that CSWD has adopted. So you're and I think it's that a commissioner can certainly abide by both, because the issue is you will either have a pecuniary interest in the outcome, or your household member or direct family member may have an interest, and so you need to recuse yourself and not participate if whether under a Winooski conflict policy or under a district policy. It's one of good public service, identifying whether a conflict exists, informing the other members of the governing body, and then not participating in it. And in both cases, the municipality that have adopted conflict policies and the district's policy all recognize that you don't lose your First Amendment right. You can still participate as in a discussion on an item as you can remove your cloak or your hat as a commissioner, and as the general member of the public might speak on a topic, you can voice an opinion. You just can't participate in the deliberations and the decision making of that process. So if there's something that it generally affects every member of the public, and if you're a Winooski resident, for example, and people are discussing changing the tax rate, yes, you might have a conflict because you own property and your taxes may go up in the city, but you don't lose the right to voice that opinion. It really has to be that direct, pecuniary interest that's separate and distinct from a general member of the public. So in sum, I think board members can abide by both their municipality that has appointed them, as well as the district's policy.
Thank you, Thomas.
I have a question on this. With reading, is this something that that we foresee that the executive director and the chair will discuss prior to meetings? I'm just thinking in my case, I can foresee some conflicts of interest arising, and I talked about this with the select board as well as with Kaylin, who's the alternate for Williston. I just want to make sure that, obviously I'll do my best to look at the minutes and identify conflicts of interest, but I want to make sure that Williston does have representation in different conversations for times when I have to recuse myself. On a second note, since Thomas is here, I would be curious how the recusal process works fully, just for my understanding. Well, since he's here on this call.
I'm happy to respond. So if a particular board member identifies that a conflict of interest exists, or even if there's an appearance of a conflict and they wish to recuse themselves, their alternate commissioner can participate, assuming that they don't have that a conflict. So in your case, the town of Williston would be represented by the alternate if you needed to recuse yourself. The existing original policy is one gets identified, and it can be discussed with the board, and if a conflict is found and there's a recusal, then generally the person needs to not participate in the deliberations of that matter. But again, their alternate could.
Oftentimes what will happen too, Kelton, is when the packet is sent out, you look on the agenda, and a lot of times members will see that there's going to be a conflict, so they'll know ahead of time. And because we aim to send the packets out 5 to 7 business days ahead of the meeting, hopefully that is enough time to reach out to the alternate where there is one. And not all of the communities have alternates, but where you do, to be able to connect with your alternate and make sure that they will be available to attend that meeting, or at least to attend for that piece. All alternates get the packet materials, same as primary commissioners, so they will have the material ahead of time. I think also what I could foresee happening, so what I do as a matter of practice is I keep a running list of items that I am anticipating will be brought to the board, and I keep that list 1 to 2 months out. So if I know that there's a new contract coming up, and one of the commissioners has an interest, or their cousin has put in a bid, and we're looking to, I'll know, and I'll be able to make sure that the chair is aware, and that we can reach out to the commissioners to say, hey, just as a heads up, this is going to be on the agenda. So be on the lookout for it to determine whether or not there would be a conflict. I think what maybe a little bit different here is with including materials that may be exempt from public session. So that's really the difference, I think, not as much the kind of general cleaning up of the policy, but the addition of that new component.
Thank you. No, and I was just, and I guess I'm just looking for a little more clarification. Is this something, obviously I'm going to do my best to make sure that I identify items. Is this something that if you identify something, you will, and again, not 100% of the time, it's not going to be perfect, but I could be reached out to in advance if possible, be like, hey, I anticipate this is something you might have a conflict of interest on.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
And that's where we're looking at it being kind of 3 people, taking that tummy test, I guess, if you say, this feels like it would be a conflict because of these items or these conditions and these forms. And then either the chair or I would reach out to the member and say, this is going to be on a future agenda. It appears that there could be a conflict. Do you agree? And then that would give you the opportunity as any of the members to think about it, ask questions, and then have the opportunity far in advance to know that a recusal would be most likely appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Elton, I want to express appreciation for your forthrightness in identifying your understanding that there could potentially be instances where your position as being employed by Casella and also being on the Board of Commissioners. It's very helpful to hear you say that, and appreciate it very much.
Paul?
Yes, Alan?
Yeah, this is Alan. I think the opposite is true, Kelton. Also, if you read through the program, and maybe Sarah or Paul hasn't picked up on it, but you see something that you feel you can give either Sarah or Paul a call and discuss with them the issue.
Absolutely. Good point. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, and I will definitely do my best avoiding anything like that. And I think kind of what Thomas says, if it's anything that individually affects Casella or that individually rather than for the benefit of the entire waste district and all the residents, I think that's really kind of what I'm looking for as my litmus test for looking through the items.
Any other questions or comments or discussion? Yes, Ron, I see you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I have a matter of curiosity, I suppose. I'm aware that Bryn, who is the commissioner for Winooski, is also a counselor on the Winooski City Council. And I wonder, I suppose, if there's ever a chance of a conflict because of what she might be doing on council, voting on something perhaps that's at odds with the Chittenden Solid Waste District. And in such a case, I suppose that would mean I might have the opportunity to step forward.
This question, I think, was recently researched on another potential situation. I don't know if Sarah, you could comment on that.
Yeah, you have it exactly right. And Thomas did look into this for us because there was the potential, or there was the question asked where there's an alternate who is serving on a select board. And the question arose around the budget. Would that person who is the alternate to the CSWD Board of Commissioners and serving on the select board be able to vote on the CSWD budget? Thomas, if you recall, you did advise that there is nothing in Vermont state law that prohibits people serving on both boards. There would be nothing that would prohibit the select board member from voting on an item before them that has to do with the Board of Commissioners, with the district. So you didn't see a conflict there. And if there's anything else you want to add regarding that. And again, I think too, also best judgment, right? You know, and it would be up to Bryn as a city councilor to be able to, again, recognize or foresee a conflict and then reach out to you, Ron, to say, on this item, nope, you're gonna have to step in. But Thomas, if you could kind of talk a little more about that example that I set forwarded to you back in, it was April.
Yeah, I think that you know, each member community appoints their representative to represent their community's voice as part of the district. You're a regional entity. And so, you know, while as a commissioner, you're looking out for the best interests of CSWD as part of your duty and responsibilities to you know, the solid waste district. You also are representing your community and have a voice, you know, whether it's concerning a drop-off center or whether it's concerning other matters. It's when it arises that it's above and beyond the representation of your town or city, where it's more direct for a benefit to you. And in that case, that's where recusal, you know, is called for. And the community then has its alternate that then takes their place when the commissioner is unable because of a conflict policy to participate. But the mere fact that, you know, a select board member or a public works director may be on the board, that in and of itself, you know, is not the type of direct conflict. However, if there's a negotiations of a direct contract, you know, that in which they're involved, then that could rise to a conflict. And that's when the alternate then, you know, would need to take their place on that matter.
And Ron, anytime that the lead commissioner is not present, the alternate has the voting authority in their place.
Okay, yeah.
Just to mention, I think I spent 6 years as a select board member in Essex and was on the board, and there never was a time that anything came into conflict that I felt. So it would be very, very rare, I think.
Right.
But thanks for the question, Ron.
Yes.
Other questions, concerns, or comments about this policy or this amendment to the conflict of interest policy? I believe then we're ready to vote on this. I've just lost the wording of the motion, but
I have, I don't know if Amy had written it down, but what I had written down was motion to adopt the amendments to the conflict of interest and ethics policy as presented in the packet. It was,
thank you.
Yeah, it was moved by John, seconded by Bryn.
It's been moved and seconded. I think we're ready to vote on it. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment is passed.
We're ready now to move on to item 5, the Materials Recovery Facility New Build Project, the MRF project. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Josh, were you going to share your screen, or did you want me to share?
If I can share, let me check. If I can, then I will, because I've got it right here.
And let me add Jen Holiday into the mix as well. So again, as we mentioned at the top of the meeting, this is excellent. This is to seeking authorization to launch the project. So this is not, we're not asking to approve any contracts. There's nothing will be signed here this evening. This is kind of a culmination of 3.5 years or more of work by both the board and staff to bring us to this point. So it's pretty exciting. So Josh, next slide, please. So here's what we are bringing to you tonight. Again, the authorization to launch the project. We'll review the past discussion and presentations that we've made and to the board and participated in. You know, why are we here? Why do we need a modern MRF? Spoiler alert, ours is not modern in the least. What will potentially a new MRF look like? What would it entail? The work that staff and I have done to date, some of the financial modeling that we're looking at, and bonding and financing options, and then finally closing out with hopefully some the board authorization. Next. So, and again, specifically, I am asking tonight for the board to authorize the launching of this new MRF project, the capital project. And the reason I'm asking for authorization to launch this is that it is a very large project with many points in between over the next 18 months, where many decisions will need to be made along the way. And really the first decision that needs to be made is, yes, we want to build a new MRF. No, we do not want to build a new MRF. So I'm seeking authorization to launch the yes, we want to build a new MRF project. Should that authorization be granted, then the establishment of an ad hoc committee, board and staff, to develop a project-based approach, so specific to the new MRF project and the bond vote, for public outreach and communication regarding this project and vote. Next, please, Josh. So as we mentioned, this has been a point of conversation for quite some time. So back in 2018, for the members who are on the board then, you'll recall 2018 was the year of retreats, and the MRF was one of them. And the first question that we asked at that retreat, at all of the retreats, was, do we want to still be in the MRF business? That was the key question. And actually it says under November, key question, retreat and tour. So we start talking to you about, again, the state of the MRF and why we were even looking at a new MRF, the limitations and the opportunities. Limitations, Josh will get into more detail in a few moments. And the opportunities were, in my mind, again, I came to CSWD with nearly 10 years of experience in managing a very large MRF in Rhode Island. And I knew that we were missing out, and that we've done a great job for the 30 years that we've owned a MRF and operated a MRF, and yet we can do a lot more. So there's much more opportunities, and those opportunities, even as the markets have been very volatile, that opportunity never went away. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And at that board retreat in 2018, the attendees at that retreat, which was an official meeting of the board, did say, yes, we do want to continue to be in the MRF business. It's important for CSWD to have that presence in Vermont, and certainly for the benefit of Chittenden County. So then we went into a lot of conversation and meetings about where should a new MRF be? And one of the questions was, should we retrofit the existing current facility? And again, Josh is going to go into some detail about why we landed on that answer being no. But that was one of the factors, along with at the retreat, we had to answer the question, well, what does doing nothing mean? Doing nothing, again, meant a lot of investment in the current MRF, and we would never be able to grow it. We would never be able to adapt to the changing packaging stream that we were seeing. And that the changes in the packaging, particularly the containers, has been tsunami-like over the past 7 or 8 years, and it is only getting more intense. So you really have to be flexible, and there's simply no way we can do that in the current setup. So we went through quite a long time of siting conversations. The board tasked us with looking across the county, not only focusing on Williston alone, but we looked across the county, eventually ending up back at Williston. It really does suit our needs, the location on Redmond Road. We had numerous conversations with the town of Williston, with the former town manager, the current town manager, the select board, gave several presentations, and walked them through our criteria and why we landed back in Williston. And again, brought as early as last February, pre-pandemic, another update and a refresher. The intent had been to bring this decision to you a year ago. As we know, other issues took precedence, so we weren't able to get that to you last year. And in some respects, it's probably a good thing because a lot has changed in just this past year that makes moving forward, in my professional opinion, the right decision. Next, please, Josh. So that was a timeline of board conversations, timeline of staff activity. We have spent a lot of time, again, 3+ years, researching best practices, researching equipment, visiting facilities that have a similar material mix to ours, process similar recyclables that we do, similar tonnages. So we didn't want to look at something that was super large. It wouldn't have made much sense for us to compare ourselves, for example, to the Rhode Island MRF, who manages 130,000 tons of recycling a year. We were looking at facilities that were in that 35 to 65,000 ton range as a kind of a sister situation. So we went to, again, saw 16+ facilities, and really were able to see things in action. And there's not one singular facility that is the model. They each had bits and pieces of things that we think would work best here in CSWD. So over 2019, 2020, you see some of the on the ground preparation that we did to ensure that the location on Redmond Road would be suitable. And the conceptual design that you see on the screen now, the pink areas are wetlands. So this is just kind of one iteration of a possible location and where we might be able to situate the MRF. There are, I believe, 3 other possibilities. There may be more as we get into really getting down to conceptual design. It would bring traffic, again, down Redmond Road, off Redmond Road, just past the Global Foundries entrance. So there's already traffic going down to that entrance, and they peel off to the left. Just past that entrance is where trucks would peel off to the right into the MRF. So they would keep the truck traffic down at that end of Redmond Road. And you'll see that the cost estimate in 2018 was around $15 million. It is higher than that now, and that is, again, 3 years later, but it is in response to the incredible surge in the cost of steel. And that is the movable object in the building estimate, is that cost of steel. So we have a best guess. We'll know more in several months. We'll go out to bid if, again, this is approved. And we'll talk a little bit later on about the potential sources of funding. Next slide, please, Josh. So a little bit, maybe a little backing up, but for folks who may be tuning in to watch tonight about MRF 101, I should assume that we know the acronyms, but MRF does stand for either Materials Recovery Facility, that's what the phrase that we use, or you may see Materials Recycling Facility. And really, it's just an aggregator and then a sorter of materials. So it's very specific as to what MRFs can do and really should do. We're talking about very few materials that we actually want to put through a MRF because they're designed to do a particular job and do that well. And again, you'll see some of the different pieces of equipment that are used to sort these materials. But we are talking about blue bin materials. So 2D, we're talking about flat paper and cardboard, 3D, containers, glass. And the MRFs are designed to manage materials according to, again, shape, weight, density, rigidity. There are definitely things you don't want in there. We don't want anything that wraps. That is a big no-no, nothing hazardous. Again, very kind of really a small universe of what is acceptable at a MRF. However, the volume of that, again, does keep growing. We are talking about, again, continuing with what's called a single stream facility versus a dual stream. As you may recall, years ago, we used to have a green bin and a blue bin. Now we have just the one blue bin. That changed to single stream recycling, all the materials mixed into one container, one bin. It was really a boon for both haulers to reduce their costs in hauling. They no longer had to have split body trucks. They could use a single chamber truck to collect the materials. It was much faster. And it was easier for consumers to understand. They didn't have to worry about which bin something went into. It was just one to manage. Next slide, please, Josh. And continuing on to kind of the modern day MRF, what we're looking at is, again, expanding our capacity to 50 to 60,000 tons per year. So with that size of a facility, we're looking at needing approximately, really no less than 5 acres. 9 is great. We have plenty of space along Redmond Road. Square footage is upwards of 75,000 square feet. And again, that's where we have some levers we can pull depending on, again, if the price of steel continues to go through the roof, we can ratchet that back down a little bit, really no less than 62,000 square feet. Currently, we have significantly less than that at our existing MRF. It's about 32 to 35,000 square feet, and we are woefully undersized. Again, Josh will get into a little more detail there as to why that is. Key for all MRFs is having plenty of tip floor square footage, that's where the trucks come in and literally tip out the materials onto a floor where then a loader pushes them into a pre-sorting area where everything that is really in there mistakenly, whether it's something that wraps or otherwise is not suitable, is pulled out, and then it goes on conveyors. And so you want a good sized tip floor, and you want lots and lots of bale storage. So at either end of the process is where we are sorely lacking. Right now, we are occasionally forced to store some of our finished product outdoors. And that is just simply not a best industry practice. We have no choice because we're so limited on bale storage. We also currently do not have technology. We have a nearly 30-year-old magnet. The magnets do lose their potency over time, and we have people power. Modern MRFs rely on technology, and Josh is going to walk you through some of the cutting edge technology, and not even really cutting edge. Eddy current is not a cutting edge technology, but it is standard in all MRFs, and we don't have one. And that is a piece of equipment that essentially temporarily makes aluminum cans magnetized so that they can be directed to a different bunker. We're picking everything by hand, and it is not effective, efficient at all. And we're looking at robotics. That is the cutting edge in the technology. We've seen some in action, and just even in the past 2 years, that has leapfrogged in the ability and their accuracy and in the affordability. And then optical sorters are the lifeblood of any new modern MRF. It's essentially a light box, and materials flow underneath the light box. And they are programmed to read the type of plastic that is flowing under it. If it is identified as the one that box wants to pick, then a puff of air will shoot that item as it has passed through over a baffle into a bunker. And they are accurate to within 95 to 98%. Truly amazing. And they are standard when we need them. Next, Josh, please. So to kind of give you, I'm going to do 2 more slides and I'm going to kick it over to Josh, Jen and Josh. Just to, what are we talking about? What's in the mix, right? So we want to make sure that we are sorting for what we have, and we are very, very heavy mix of fiber products, paper and cardboard. And that is what many MRFs are doing now. They are adding optical sorting on the paper lines to be able to clean up that stream and to be able to sort for the office white paper, the sorted office white, because that is where there's a lot of value. There's not much value in newsprint. There's not a lot of newsprint out there. There's not much value in junk mail. So you want to pull out of that stream the material that has the most value, cardboard and office white. And that is really done. Cardboard is easy. Office white is helped by optical sorting. And again, the optical sorting would be in place for the containers. Josh, the next slide, please.
Sarah, just one moment. Well, if you can just go through those acronyms.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you. So PGA, processed glass aggregate. MSW is municipal solid waste. So that's our residue. That is the material that generally that consumers will put into the bin, maybe either just completely by mistake. They meant to toss it in the trash, but it kicked back and tossed into the recycling, or is a wish cycling. They are hoping that it may be recycled, but it's not part of the program. So that is really the material that is truly just is the trash, and then paper and cardboard. Thank you, Brendan. We do get caught in our acronyms. So as far as where our revenue falls, where are we gaining our revenue? You can see that again, just 50%, a little over 50% of the revenue is coming from the cardboard and the paper stream. So 57%, again, combined from fiscal 17 to now, is that stream. And those two material streams make up nearly 80% of, or 73% of what we process. So we really need to make hay on the containers, even though there's not as much in the mix percentage-wise. They can represent, again, a significant component of our revenue, and we want to be able to extract as much of the value out of that that stream and make sure that the bales that we're sending to market, that there's only PET in the PET bale, that there's only plastic bottles, that there's only aluminum cans in the aluminum can bale. So our contamination isn't necessarily something that was mistakenly thrown in and got into the plastic bottle bale. It's having too much aluminum in the plastic bottle bale, having too much plastic in the aluminum bale. Optical sorters, eddy currents, stronger magnets help to create that bale purity. Next slide.
I also wanted to jump on this real quick, Sarah. This slide jumped off the page at me when I put it together. Is that one of the things a new MRF allows is flexibility. When you look at that paper number, that 6% of our revenue on sold commodities is coming from paper. That's because we had a significant recycling crisis. China stopped taking material. Domestic markets had to develop. And so really what got hit the hardest was the paper product market. In FY18, paper made up 24% of our revenue. And in FY17, it made up 36%. So in reality, when we're talking about needing flexibility to pivot or needing the ability to clean things differently, this really kind of shows that significantly, that it hit us hard in our revenue and our ability to market. If we were to have an optical sorter, say, for instance, on a paper line, that we could look for the best market that we can get the most value out of our product. And we're doing the best we can now. And like Sarah said, we're doing a great job, but this really jumped off the page that shifted in the last 4 years. And that's a significant shift that everybody saw across the board.
Josh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think you're up next.
Yep. So kind of this is what a MRF should look like, or what you want it to look like. You want material, if you're looking at the left picture, to flow in long lines, so that if you've got people picking things you don't want or that you do want, they can get to them. In this particular instance, this is people picking out the things we don't want: the MSW, the hoses, the fence posts, the tennis shoes, things that people thought somebody might want to wear again and don't understand how a recycling center works. So that's extremely important, is those long straight lines. The picture on the right also shows when you have your screens, those are fiber screens that you see there. You want them accessible on one plane. And when I say one plane, you can see there's the floor and then there's stairs coming up, so that maintenance wise, you can get to them. If you need to see something in there, you can see it. When you start to run out of room, that's when you start stacking things on top of themselves. And that's when maintenance becomes a significant shift issue. So this is kind of the footprint that we want to model. And this is what we saw when we went to our 16 facilities. The newer MRFs all look like this. As Sarah had mentioned, the top left corner, you want a very large tip floor. Our tip floor has about a day and a half, if we're lucky, storage. And really what that means is that if something breaks, you need to still take recycling before you can tell people it's got to go somewhere else. So that's why you want a large tip floor. If you look at the picture on the top left also, on the bottom corner of that top left picture, that is a source separated receiving area. And so what that means is if somebody shows up with only cardboard or only aluminum, you don't have to mix it in with everything else. You can actually just keep it in one spot and then send it directly to a baler, which cuts out a lot of maintenance requirements, a lot of labor requirements. You don't have to process it. We don't have that in our current MRF, but that's what a lot of new MRFs are doing. Again, on the top right, that's another, that's what the source separated zone would look like. That's a really big recycling center out of Cincinnati. So that's why that source separated zone so large. But again, if you look at the bottom picture, everything's on one plane. A typical MRF needs about 34 feet of clearance, and you lift all the materials about 16, or all the processing about 16 feet off the ground. That way you can get to the bottom of it if you need to change motors out. But also leaves space for stuff to drop as it gets sorted into a container, and then that goes to a conveyor, then goes to a baler. So it's a pretty slick way that it's been developed over the years, and it maximizes all the efficiencies. So Josh,
Lee has a question in the chat regarding cardboard. So it's how often does the current MRF receive cardboard only, but really does the current MRF receive cardboard only?
It's minimal. So certain offices have accounts with us, like an Office Depot, for instance, and they bring us cardboard only. I would say 3 to 5% of our cardboard comes in as cardboard only. It's very minimal. And the problem is, which you can't see here, I'll show you with our tip floor. Our tip floor is small. So when you bring it in, it requires us to kind of stop traffic, secure a spot where it won't get commingled with the other stuff that's coming in. And then it has to sit there until the entire day's over. And then it gets pushed to the cardboard section. So we do receive it currently, but it's not there's no real efficient way to do it. So that's one thing this new facility would fix. And if any other questions come out, Sarah, give me a yell. So our current MRF, we're currently on 3 acres, plus or minus, in Williston off of Industrial Ave. We are contained. There is a business to our left on this picture. There's a road to our right. The bottom is the transfer station owned by Casella, and the top is a ravine. So we can't expand. We can't get any bigger, even if we wanted to. And you need room in your yard for truck traffic, both for commodities or for material to come in and commodities to go out. Our entire footprint, including office space, is 36,500, give or take, square feet. Our tip floor, operating floor, and bale storage is about 33,000. That's too small. Like I said, the tip floor is too small because we can't, if we go down, we're stuck with having to hustle to make sure we're running things through. And conversely, on the bale storage side of things, if there's a snowstorm, if transportation becomes difficult to get up to us, if the month's commodity market hits the ground and we want to hold for maybe a month, if we can't do that currently. And as Sarah had mentioned, I think the last large hurricane in Florida pulled a lot of transportation and relief support there, which meant that we had to stack our containers outside of our facility until we could get a truck to come take it to market. So that's another reason why you want a lot of bale storage space. And not to beat up a dead horse, but also larger bale storage space will allow us to take materials that we could probably bring to market at a break even, but we just don't have the space to take it because it doesn't come in at a high volume. So like rigid plastics, for instance, if we could have more space, we could take it more often and then wait till we had a load that could go to market. Right now, our rigid plastics go once every 2 years just because we don't have a big stream of it coming through. So it just allows more flexibility. So here's our tip floor. You can see the bales that are sitting in the bottom corner. Those look like bales of mixed paper. They're there because we ran out of room on our bale storage. That tip floor right there, again, has about a day and a half of storage. We are operating our current MRF at maximum capacity. We are running at about 24 tons an hour. It was designed for 20. We don't have any room for expansion. And the building itself was erected in 1993. We did have an add-on for this particular, when we went from single stream to dual stream for this tip floor, but it's over 20 years old. Again, restrictions and limitations. Let me just do one thing. Sorry, okay, there we go. Commodity storage. So when you actually take your containers, so say your aluminum, the places where we put the aluminum are really small. So that means that we're forced to stop baling one thing and bale another thing because we ran out of space to put it. For instance, PET, we had to add an extra cage just because more people are drinking water. There's more PET coming in. So that's a significant limiting factor as far as an operational efficiency goes. We only have one baler. Before we replaced it, when the old baler went down, the heartbeat of the MRF stopped. So all MRFs that we've seen, or at least I'd say the bulk of them, have two balers for that particular reason, is that you live and die by what you can get through your baler. Our existing MRF also, if we were to add technology, Sarah talked about an eddy current, we would actually have to hang it off the rafters. So it would cost as much in construction as it would for the actual piece of equipment, if not more. Inefficient sorting, we're double processing. So again, we take all of our fibers out first. We then pick all of our containers. The containers we miss actually get spilled into a bunker and returned back to the tip floor. So you can watch aluminum or even like HDPE natural, both of which are, $1,500 to $1,800 per ton, respectively, get missed, and not by any fault of anybody who's picking it, and sent back to the tip floor to be reprocessed, which is a significant inefficiency. And then bale quality, this really comes down to, because we're picking things by hand, certain things get put into places they shouldn't be. So for instance, HDPE natural, which is the clear jugs, that's worth roughly at this point, which is an all-time high, $1,900 a ton. If that winds up in a PET or an aluminum bin, that's considered residual. It's considered garbage. So we're losing out on that, and that's what's happening with not having optical sorters, the required technology that everybody else has, to make sure that the right material is going to the right place. And kind of to back that up, Jen Holiday and staff and myself, we did a tubs and lids bale sort. And again, this is a snapshot in time. We took two bales and we painstakingly opened them up and ripped through them. But what we found was is that, 11% was PET and 24% was HDPE. Tubs and lids goes for about $200 a ton. As I said, PET is up in the 700s and HDPE can go as high as 1900. So, those are opportunities that we're missing out on just from a revenue standpoint and an operational standpoint. Jen, jump in at this point if you wanted to mention anything more, because I know we were standing next to each other when we did this.
Just to clarify, Josh, or for the board, that tubs and lids should only be number 3 through 7s, and the 1s and 2s are the items that don't belong in there and that we're losing revenue. Just to clarify that. Thanks.
Thank you. So again, tons of opportunities. The MRF is got a lot of opportunities. I guess what I'm trying to say. So some of the takeaways. A lot of the facilities we looked at had technology, and what I'm gonna, hopefully this runs, and if anybody has earbuds in, turn it down a little bit because this has the potential to be loud if it runs. I just want to give everybody a heads up on that. But here is what a clean paper stream looks like. Okay, so it's not super loud, that's good. But you can see there's not a ton of garbage in there, not a ton of 4-packs for soda bottles or soda cans, and there's not a lot of plastic bags, because that was hit with an optical sorter, and that's going to get us the highest value we can possibly get for one of the larger amounts of material that we receive and market at our facility. This is what an optical sorter looks like. It's got little nozzles that shoots airs on materials that it recognizes. And that's pretty common, and I'd say the bulk of the MRFs across the globe at this point. So technology is extremely important, and it allows us to get the purity and the quality that we need to be really competitive in the market. Another thing that's kind of the takeaway with the new MRF is historically people built MRFs to kind of their capacity that they needed. So 20 tons an hour is kind of one of the tons per hour that you run through your processing facility. And then you would just add on, you just push it harder. That was a pretty standard practice from, the mid 90s all the way up to about 2018 to be exact, because that's when China stopped taking things that weren't sorted very well because they were being pushed through. Nowadays, when you size your facility, you size it to the tonnage rate that you want. And you don't want to push that so that the processing actually works the way it was initially designed, which requires larger footprints. Again, which is why our existing facility, we can't expand our footprint in any way. And again, here's the top left is what we are currently using, and those are this is a newspaper screen, it's a star screen, and we've got them stacked on each other, but that's what it looks like, and here's, and then the bottom right, a lot of technology has come out where the bottom right is actually an example of wrapless shafts, where the shafts that run the stars are the diameter is large enough that plastics don't wrap around them. So in the top left example, we have to send people on shift breaks to cut out the plastic multiple times a shift. Also, a lot of MRF manufacturers are playing with star screens or disc types to see to optimize how we can separate our fibers from our containers. And then this is a ballistic separator. That's how a ballistic separator moves. And what it does is it's kind of, we use it as a polishing screen. And we've got one that was installed in 2014, which was our last MRF update. And, at the point where if we go forward and build a new MRF, that technology will have been 10 years old. One of the other things I'm showing in the bottom left is just our cardboard screens. They've got different size discs and different type of discs now from our last upgrade as well. So technology is advancing quickly. Again, that's what a ballistic looks like when it's things kind of bounce and float. And I'm going to hand it off to Jen Holiday for education and why it's extremely important.
Hey, Josh, a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you go back to your slide where you showed kind of the footprint of the MRF? Do we have a view of what Casella's MRF, how that would compare to our MRF in terms of all the similar statistics and also materials processed in and out?
As far as the Rutland MRF, is that what you're asking?
Correct.
We don't have those offhand.
Yeah, the Rutland MRF does have a larger tip floor. That MRF processes fewer materials through. They process around 40 to 42,000 tons a year, but their tip floor is significantly larger. They are investing in some glass cleanup material as well. I'm not sure, Jen, if you remember, or Josh, if you remember, I don't think that they're putting in optical sorters there. They are doing some other upgrades. I know that, again, I think the footprint of that MRF is just a little bit bigger than this one, but not by much. And John posted a question in the chat as well, 2 questions. So moving stuff like that with people interacting makes me think of workers' comp issues. How would the new system be safer? And second, what feature of the existing facility? So yes, John, you're exactly right. The current process of hand sorting all of the materials in a very closed situation. So what picture we didn't show you is of the container line. It's a very, very small room. It is there's one conveyor belt that goes through along roughly the middle of the room. There are chutes for the bunkers on the opposite side of the conveyor line. And then there's just a walkway where the workers stand, and you can barely walk past them. So it's probably, Josh, what would you say? Is it 12 feet wide even?
I would say 8, to be honest with you. I would say 8, and they've got maybe 3 feet of walking space beyond the conveyor, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder.
They're standing shoulder to shoulder, and they are like, each person is trained to spot a particular type of material, and it's repetitive action, constant repetitive action. If you have vertigo, you do not want to work in a MRF. You're standing kind of stooped over. It's a very, it's obviously labor intensive the way we do it, but it's a very stressful and strenuous job. It's dusty and loud. And so yes, we don't have numbers of workers' comp injuries related to the MRF. We could get them. We do know that the workforce that Casella has there, and again, Casella operates the MRF on our behalf through an operating agreement. They do retain a good number of the workers. So it's steady work. Recycling doesn't stop. It keeps on coming in, but it's very, very difficult. It's very hard work. So the new system, what the technology does is so what we do is the material will come to the tip floor. It will be conveyed to what's called a pre-sort area. We will have people there, again, much longer, wider belts, longer belts, and they're specifically looking for items that should not be in the blue bin. So again, as Josh mentioned, those tanglers, hoses, mini propane tanks that you use at your camp, bowling balls, dead animals, pulling those things off the line and only leaving the other items. Those items then go through the system to be sorted mechanically. So the paper and the cardboard gets sorted mechanically. The containers would go under these optical sorters, would be sorted mechanically. Then the jobs for people become quality control, quality assurance. So they are looking for materials that the machines have missed. So it becomes a much less labor intensive and much less stressful job. It becomes a much better job, a safer job. So that is a primary benefit of the technology, not just a better bale quality, but a much safer and a better job for employees. So the second question, the future of the existing facility, that is actually not part of this presentation. That will be a conversation for the board that we'll want to have, because I think there are many options for that facility. But we don't necessarily want to have that conversation now, but we will be having that over the next coming months, again, should the board authorize the launch of this project. Thank you, John. Good questions.
Just for point of clarification, I think sometimes physically a football field is 48,000 square feet, where I think currently at about 2/3 of a football field on the current MRF, and the recommendation of 60 to 70,000 square feet would be a 1.5 football field. Mm-hmm. So just makes it more concrete, perhaps for some of us commissioners.
Yeah, no, exactly. Very, very good point. And one of their graphs shows that we have 7% MSW, which is an important number because that's great. That's up there in the best in the country. But education, if we can get that number lower, those are things that just shouldn't be there to begin with, which I'm teeing Jen up.
I have a question there on that MSW. So talking about eddy currents and stuff and pulling off junk mail and stuff like that you're saying has no value, do you foresee pulling more stuff out and having that MSW number going up from 7%? Or are you going to just, just from my understanding, are you going to do multiple, like a junk mail bail, or just kind of seeing? I imagine you probably will pull out more trash if you're sorting it better. So I'm curious about that.
I can jump on that one. So currently, not to get too acronymy, but the traditional paper lines, in which we are focusing a lot on paper because it's almost 40% of our marketable material. There was traditionally number 8 news. Newspapers have kind of died, so that's not really a category anymore. There's sorted office waste, which is shredded paper. We do get that, and we do bale that, and we sell that, and that has a good commodity value. There's mixed paper, which is the lower quality paper, which is not much. It's break even, if not a little bit better. And then there's what's called SRP, sorted residential paper, which I'm sure you've heard of. And that has a higher quality. That carries, right now we're between $45 and $75 a ton, which is really important. So the idea would be to get the most value out of our valuable tons, and then still be able to sell kind of a lower grade material, because there still is a market for the lower grade material. But it would be to really kind of maximize the ability to get the most value out of that paper line, if that makes sense. It wouldn't be to create; it would just be to get the right stuff in the right place.
Yeah, and I know just sometimes it's hard to move some of the lower quality stuff unless you also are moving the higher quality stuff or the mid quality stuff. And I was just curious. So do you think? I guess back to the other question. Do you think the MSW will go up from 7% with the new MRF?
I personally don't, another, and the reason is that the low quality stuff is low quality because it's not, very readily, it's just not a pulpable material. But when you send the low quality stuff, if you've got plastics and things in there, a lot of mills don't want it or just won't take it. So the idea would be to kind of make those plastics be where the plastics are supposed to be, the HD zones and the PET zones. So that's really important. We've gone down to Putney, which has a big Sandview paper mill, and that's one of the things they said to us is that they don't have a problem with low quality papers. It's just the non-paper amount really gives them a hard time. So I don't think our residual would go up, to be totally honest with you. I think we would be getting the right things in the right place. But another thing that drives the residual is PGA cleanup. And so this new MRF, we will be focusing on process glass aggregate cleanup as well. That's a whole other discussion about a UVM study. But that if you set your cleanup on that, you could potentially lose a lot of glass into your dumpsters. And that's really what we saw is at our own MRF. When we put our new system in, that was a driving factor of our MSW and just dialing that in. And that happened over about a 2 or so month period around 2015, that we actually had to really say, oh, holy smokes, we're not pushing glass off. So again, that's probably way more detailed than you wanted, but long story short, no, I don't see us, going above that. And actually, with a better education center, I see us really trying to dig into that even better.
I just want to jump in here and point out it's almost 10 minutes to 8. We're still got a long ways in this presentation. I think these are great questions, and we really need to understand a lot about this. But I'd ask, if you have, what we're being asked tonight to do is to decide whether or not to launch this project. We're not deciding to do the project. So questions that come up, if keep them focused to helping you make a decision whether or not we should be proceeding to the next step.
Thank you.
But these are great questions that hopefully someday will be asked and answered.
All right,
Ready to
so
move on.
this is Jen. I'll jump in here with the education piece. I just have two quick slides here. As you all know, we believe education is an essential pillar of what CSWD does, and the board has been very supportive of that. We appreciate that. We have a multi-pronged approach. You can see here where our outreach team provides education and assistance to residents, businesses, and schools. Next slide, Josh. Then we have our marketing and communications team, which is responsible for many things, but among those things, they develop and produce these type of educational tools that our outreach team and facilities distribute. Another tool that the outreach team uses for educating our constituents are tours of our facilities. MRF tours have been a long-standing popular way to show our community that recycling works, how it works, and the importance of putting only the acceptable materials in the blue bin to reduce contamination. That has been a real eye-opener for many MRF tour participants. And in 2019, we conducted 75 MRF tours, just to give you an idea of how popular these tours are. And we intend to continue to use this tool moving into a future MRF. However, unlike the current MRF that we have, we're actually thinking about education and designing the new facility with these tours and education in mind. So we can provide the public access to this public facility in a safe and clean environment, which is not what, I won't say we don't have a safe environment, because we strive very hard in our current MRF to provide safe tours, and we wouldn't give them if they were not, but it's certainly not clean, and it is not a quality experience that it could be. So the preliminary design includes catwalks throughout the processing area for tours, as well as an education room on the second floor with viewing into the processing area. And this would be a welcome improvement in how we're providing tours today at our MRF. So that's the plan so far. And I think it'll be a huge improvement. So next slide.
So work to date. We've conducted once we identified the property that we would like to construct, we performed a wetland study. Some of those wetlands are class 2s, some of them are class 3s. Class 3s you can impact without question. Class 2s you definitely want to stay away from. We've also been working on archaeology, rare and endangered species study, and we've been engaged with Williston's Conservation Commission just for siting purposes. We're also bringing a water line, which is actually connected to our composting project. Our phase 3 is what we're calling it, but that water line will have a T that will feed our recycling center, which would be welcome to have municipal water down to the site just for fire suppression and also for the office and the education zone that Jen was talking about. In our site civil assessment, I'm kind of showing you in the top right, that picture that we had originally showed you. That's one conceptual plan, but the idea was to have the full square footage footprint of about 60,000 square feet. Our tip floor is about 12,500 square feet, which is about 4 times larger than what we have currently. Our processing floor is 35,000 square feet, and our bale storage is about 12,000 square feet, again, which is about 3 to 4 times larger than what we have now. The office building would have an education center on top of it, and we're looking to process about 25 tons per hour, which is based on our current 48,000 to 50,000 annual tons we receive at the MRF. That estimate is between 18 and 25 million. A real general breakdown is about 8 million to build the site, all the site work and erecting the building, about 12 million for equipment. Then if we want to go with a green infrastructure, solar, kind of a a heating and cooling envelope and reducing as much as we can as far as our impact goes. We're estimating 2.5 million. And another thing that's really advanced, which kind of Sarah had said, maybe it was better that we had to wait a year, because robotics are really taking a jump. And what robotics would do would be replacing those positions at the QA/QC point. Robotics can't replace an optical sorter, in my opinion, at this point, but they could replace some quality control spots. So, if we were to look at that as well, about $2.5 million would be, enough to fit our site up with robotics. We're kind of on the fence on that. I think we need to do a little more research, but that's kind of a general, very high level breakdown of where that cost estimate would be broken up. So when we talk about our assumptions, what we're talking about is we estimate we have about 35,000 annual tons, that's on a yearly basis, that are available to us in Chittenden County. If we include Chittenden County and Northern Vermont, we assume that we have currently 50,000 annual tons. If we were to build, the assumption would be that we would probably have to bond. We would assume a 25-year bond at 2% interest. We would want to process glass, paper, and cardboard containers, and that's aluminum and all the plastic containers that we can market. And what we're going to assume is that the ACR floor would be $45 a ton and the ceiling would be $120 a ton.
Josh, what's the ACR?
And what the ACR is the average commodity revenue. And what that means is you saw that we have a bunch of material that comes in and a bunch of material that goes out, and we get paid for those materials that go out, the ones that we market. The ACR is the tons that we send out the door that we get paid for. So it's the price that we receive in revenue divided by the tons. So it's just an average amount of what all those marketable materials are worth. A great ACR is above 100. An extremely poor ACR is below 50, if that makes sense. That's if the markets are good, it's above 100. If they're not good at all, they're below 50.
What's our current ACR?
Our current ACR is between 95 and 103 right now. It's going up and down. And that's because containers, specifically some of the plastics, are at all-time highs. And our paper markets are starting to recover, which is great to see, because that's really, when the paper markets recover, that's really good for us, because the bulk of our material is either paper or cardboard. So, kind of just a model, and there's a lot of numbers on this thing here for you guys. But what we did was we just kind of looked at the viability of a MRF under two scenarios. Scenario one is if we only saw 35,000 tons. And really what that means is if we only served Chittenden County. And we wanted to see the viability under three ACR scenarios. $45, which is the numbers on the left, $80, which are the numbers in the middle, and $120, which are the numbers on the right. And so what we did is we looked at ACR inbound tons, what we estimate we would be able to market, which would be marketable outbound tons, where our tipping fee is, our assumed operating cost, and then if we went to bond, what the bond cost would be, so that we could do kind of a P&L for lack of a very rudimentary one. But we have our revenues coming in that would be based on our tip fee and our ACR. And then we'd have our costs based on the cost to process, the cost to operate, which is insurance, payment in lieu of taxes, some basic maintenance requirements, our capital costs, which is an assumed capital cost now under our current capital budget. That you would assume if you built a new MRF, that might go down, which it will, but that's kind of under our current rate. And then we assume the bond payment. And so the net is what you would see if we, under these scenarios, and these are very broad, and we will ask, a consultant moving forward to dig into our assumptions and really to kind of get a real world value out of it from our region and from a national perspective. But what this tells us is that, in an extremely poor market with the ACR bad, that 35,000 tons is not great for us. In a moderate ACR at $8 a ton, we are viable. In an extremely good market, that we're also viable. What this doesn't take into account is that we can change our tip fee. So we can raise or lower the tip fee. We like to stay in market, and our current tip fee is in regional and local market.
But isn't the idea that there'll be efficiencies in the new MRF, which should bring down your operating costs?
That's what we kind of want the consultant for. This is taking into account everything that we can see that we know is required to run the facility, or that we would want to build. Also, if you notice, I've got the capital costs that we would have to bond for 18 million. With 35,000 tons, we would assume that we would want a 20 ton per hour facility and a smaller footprint. But yes, Leslie, I'm outwardly saying this is kind of a 50,000 foot view with the best information that we have from what we've seen. But we would want to verify this. This is just kind of giving you a litmus test.
I have how would the new bottle bill and possible other bottle bills that are going into affect this financial model? Because obviously looking 38% of the revenue is containers and 5% is steel cans. So if we're losing that percent of the revenue, will that, I'm just curious how that'll affect the model.
Yeah, it's not a one-to-one. When we looked at, and Jen, please jump in, you did most of the research on this. When we took a look at, backing up, we don't receive any bottle bill material now, right? So we're, as far as from the redemption system, all of the containers that would possibly be bottle bill material, there's not a significant amount of those containers that we would actually lose out of our system. Jen, do you recall the potential impact? It was fairly low to us.
Yeah, so I am just recalling from memory. I'm not looking at anything at the moment. So I believe we would lose approximately 11% of our containers, PET containers. So when I did the financial analysis of what the current volumes are and what the tip fee under the current ACR is, we were looking at having to raise the tip fee probably $3 or $4 to cover that loss.
And again, the percentages we showed you earlier on revenue in that pie chart, that was through a catastrophic recycling crisis. So that's why those shifted. Our historic numbers were between 20 and 30% of our revenue came from our paper, our fiber line, which then again would reduce the percentage amount of the containers. So we relied heavily on containers through the recycling crisis because they also went through the roof. The pricing on containers went really high. So that also I think would need to be fleshed out when we engage with a consultant moving forward.
And again, to keep in mind for the material mix, when we're talking about PET, that it only represents about 3% of our overall materials that we put through the system. What would also be good for us is removing some of the glass from the system. So we would see some benefit from not having to manage as much glass. If, for example, at some point, if we can, if the legislators decide they do want to add wine bottles to the redemption system, wonderful. So as far as the additional PET, as Jen said, there would be some reduction, but in the overall grand scheme of what is processed and what that represents as far as revenue, it's not a very large hit.
Hey, Josh, this slide shows pro forma scenarios based upon different ACRs, but all under the assumption that we've invested in a new MRF. Are we doing any comparisons of the baseline? In other words, the pro forma of where we are today versus where we would be with a MRF in different scenarios?
Well, and this, yeah, Sarah.
No, go ahead, Josh. Just to say, Tim, you're going in and out a little bit. I think we got the question though. Go ahead, Josh.
Right. So yeah, this doesn't take into account the baseline. And again, I think this was the intent of this was to kind of show just the temperature of, you know, a bond and how it would affect our bottom line.
I'm sorry, it's not.
Could I make a suggestion from the way I'm understanding it as someone who does a lot of capital investment modeling? This is a very rough,
yes,
crude, high-level estimate to flesh out the impact of different variables. The controlling variables here are the ACR and the scale of the MRF. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the same kind of display for a larger MRF. And I don't think at this point, this is just a real crude, rough, high-level ballpark. Is this even feasible kind of exercise? It is not an analysis. And I think the board has to understand, has to view this from that perspective, because right now the question before us is, should we even launch this project? And that's my understanding of where we're at with this.
Yeah, Leslie, I want to just jump in here and try to frame it. But to my mind, we really have two questions in this presentation. One, is a new MRF justified, yes or no, based on all the issues and variables or the items that Josh has presented? And the second question is, do these financials, based on very broad assumptions, give the board confidence that we're ready to start moving on with the planning process? Yes or no? My sense is that the new MRF is justified, but I would throw it out to the whole board. Do we have a confidence that these numbers, are they so scary that we say, no, this isn't the way we have to go, or we think that we have confidence this is possible, this is doable, but we certainly need to hone these numbers a lot more?
Correct.
So,
and the analysis was, you know, if we ran it at 35,000 tons over the variable ACRs, if the net was negative on all of them, that would be a significant indicator that our broad brush said, oh gosh, this isn't great. You know, that's kind of the intent of this, is to say, you know, at Chittenden County only tons under a terrible ACR, it's not favorable to move forward. But again, this doesn't take into account that we can raise the tip fee. So, you know, there's some things in there that, you know, it's under kind of current scenarios. But yes, Paul, you framed that very well.
So I want to caution us not to get too, as Leslie said, don't get too caught up in the specifics of these numbers. We have to trust that you're giving us a realistic, your best estimate for broad scope here, to give the board confidence whether or not to authorize you to move forward. That's what I think we're talking about here.
And when we move forward to the 50,000 ton, what this really gleans is that more tons is better, and a more favorable ACR is better, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and it makes it more affordable.
I'm sorry, I want to come back to this issue because I guess what I'm saying is that there's a fourth. We're not evaluating these numbers off of a baseline, which is the current scenario. And these are all an analysis based upon different ACRs, assuming we invested in a MRF. But if we have a fourth pro forma on here, a fourth column of showing us, you know, a second set of numbers to match each one of these for ACRs and revenues, would they be, you know, are we going to see a $1 million improvement in the overall district financials or a $4 million erosion? And I guess I'm a little bit concerned that we're being asked to make a decision on so whether or not we should launch the project. And all we're doing is looking at what different scenarios are for the MRF on assuming different volumes and pricing estimates on ACRs.
Tim, I have a very different perspective than you seem to have on what the purpose of this information is and what we're expected to make of it. Right now, a pro forma revenue and expenditure would have to deal with the limitations in the current MRF and the current operating costs. And this is attempting to do a high level check, if it were verification, as to whether a project of this sort might be feasible without going into the details and without any the question that you raise is completely legitimate. Would this put us in the hole, or would this add to our financial strength? But that question cannot be answered without much more detailed modeling, which this initial cut is not designed to do. I think we can't put a lot of weight on these numbers right now because this is a huge, broad brush, high level it's not a guesstimate at best.
I guess my point is every investment analysis always considers a baseline, which is do nothing.
This is not an investment analysis. This is not an investment analysis. It's too incomplete. It's too restrictive. What I believe the staff are asking us is, should we go forward to the next step to do an investment analysis, or should we just can the whole idea? That's my understanding of what's on the agenda in terms of board decision tonight. Do I have that wrong?
No, you have that right, Leslie, as far as what we're asking. I think, Tim, we have had conversations regarding, and you're right, there should always be either a status quo or a do nothing option that we look at. And we have had those conversations as a board regarding, well, what does it mean for us to do nothing? And doing nothing doesn't come at zero cost. I think everyone can understand that. There would need to be some significant capital investments in the existing facility simply to keep it at the current processing capacity. There's no way for us to be able to, for example, we could remove the guts of that building, put in shiny new equipment. However, we would never be able to put in, as Josh mentioned earlier, an efficient and effective system with optical sorting that is, again, current technology. It is the standard technology. We could get a new magnet in for sure. There would not be the ability to have that length, that run of conveyors that is needed for the optics. The eddy current separator, as he said, would have to be hung from the rafters. So there are significant limitations to having this current facility be any more flexible for the needs of the future packaging and marketing needs of the future. So when we're looking at the do nothing, we could model the current state, but doing nothing really is not going to advance our program whatsoever.
And then the numbers will prove that out.
But yes, and we've had that conversation. We've discussed all of the limitations, and we could show you again the current state. Josh could probably speak to the current state off the top of his head, and the consultant will certainly have that, as we did when we did this for the compost project, right, for the compost facility. We had that current state, status quo, what happens if we do nothing. And again, moving this program forward, doing nothing is going in the wrong direction, in my opinion.
And I would also point out that 2 years ago, the cost estimate, very rough cost estimate, was $15 million. Now we're looking at $18 to $25 million. I hate to say, the longer you wait, the more it's going to cost. That forces us into perhaps rushing a decision. But I think the reality is the costs are only going in one direction. And ultimately, someday we're going to have to do something. Question is this the right plan at the right time? Or do we have a confidence to authorize the general manager to move forward with developing those plans?
Just make a quick comment?
Yep.
I do want to reflect on all of the retreats that many of these board members participated in 2018 and 2019. And the discussion through all those meetings was supportive of moving forward with exploration of this. So I want to highlight that there has been some extensive conversation, and we're not committing to the specifics tonight, as have been reiterated. We're just authorizing the executive director and the team to move forward with those explorations so that we can get further answers.
I'd like, if I may, to make one other point following up on Paul Roos's comment, and that is that the costs of maintaining the existing MRF are going to go up, just as the estimate of the cost of building a new MRF are going up. And as a 20-year-old mechanical operation continues to deteriorate, the hidden cost in terms of health and safety, in terms of deteriorating output, because the machinery is deteriorating, so there's a threat to your revenue from the existing. There's no such thing as do nothing, because do nothing means deteriorate. So I really feel that we need to use the right language in describing what our options are. And the options are: give the staff the go-ahead to refine this further, or don't give them that and have them come to us with big bills just to keep the clunker going. Those are the options before us tonight, as I see it.
At which point there will be higher expenses and potentially more lost revenue as the materials that come into the facility evolve and are harder to separate and sort to the specifications that the end use customer wants.
Or the labor market says they don't want to do it anymore. That's another significant concern with our existing setup.
We are now at 8:15. We haven't yet gone through the remaining elements of this presentation, which is to talk a little bit about how we might find the money or how to pay for this. And we have yet to even have a motion to put this up to the board for consideration.
A couple of people have had a long say, and there are some other thoughts out there. And as somebody that's tried to sell bond issues before, Josh's comments about we can just raise the tip fee, which is a tax on the individuals in Chittenden County, isn't a good answer if you're trying to sell a bond, because it's going to cost somebody some more money. I also, know what we've done with respect to costs that we've gotten at the MRF for products, and those things can go south again. And we have been involved in 2 projects that have cost the district a lot of money, and we end up trying to fund it out of other funds, and that's both the project that's over where the paint recycling is, and in compost. And we know what we've had to do with both those projects over the years. And I know that we talked about moving forward with our own MRF and doing other things, but we were talking about a different price and construction costs at a different level. And I don't know if there's a another option out there that is to see if, you know, this might be managed and run by somebody else, as opposed to the district running it. But I just am very concerned by the numbers that I see here. And yeah, they're very, you know, high level numbers to look at, but I'm a little bit concerned with what I see today.
Well, in getting to the question of how this might be financed, so we have been talking a lot about a bond, and I talked to our select boards about this option, and their main question was, are you going to charge an assessment to our member towns? And again, that is not the intention. The intention, as you mentioned, Alan, is to be able to fund and finance the operations and the bond debt repayment out of the fees that we charge. However, we are shaking other trees. We have submitted the initial paperwork through Senator Leahy's office for an earmark. Those are not ever guaranteed. We haven't had earmarks around for 10 or 12 years, so it's been quite some time. But because the current facility essentially functions as a regional facility, we think it has just as good a shot at being funded as any other regional facility in the state, given the importance of the infrastructure that the MRF represents to the solid waste system in Vermont. There is also the option of funding through the closed loop fund. They are very interested in funding projects and funding MRFs that include robotics, and they provide $5 million maximum loan at 0% interest to municipalities. There is a shorter repayment timeline for that, but it is, again, zero interest. The current interest rate for the municipal bond is about 2%. So again, given the timeline of when we might be looking at the bond, that interest rate will most likely be different. They do have a couple of different options for repayment, 20 years, 25 years. We would take a look at that, most likely, again, stretch it out to 25 years to ensure that we will be able to cover that bond debt. And as you mentioned, it does require voter approval, so it's not automatic. However, there's tremendous support from our constituents for our programs. Jen talked about the MRF tours. It's consistently not only an extremely popular field trip, but we get a lot of adult groups who want to see how things work and how they're done, and really are truly amazed by what we're able to do with the facility we have. And everyone, the adults who comment back on it, on the tours, remark that, they feel, just from a layperson's perspective, that we need a new facility. Again, we know that the nitty gritty, it's easy to say, yeah, you need a new building. But I think that we would certainly be able to continue to make the case to our constituents that this is an investment in not only Chittenden County's future, but in Vermont's future, in order to be able to continue to help the citizens of Chittenden County be able to meet the state mandates for recycling. And we've been doing this very well for a very long time. So I'm confident that there's a good amount of support there. Leslie, you have a question?
Well, I think the other thing to bear in mind, with so much movement going on, hopefully at the federal level for infrastructure projects, that you can put together a financing plan that draws from multiple sources. So you don't have to assume that 100% of the capital cost is financed by a municipal bond.
That's right.
You could find, there will be other sources, the machinery may be under one program, and the site preparation may be under another program. So when you're thinking about how you're going to finance the project, you have to look at an array of options, just as you look at an array of options in terms of design. So I think this is a little early in the process to try to make assumptions about what your financing costs are going to be.
True, and we only showed you in the overview the one option, right, the bond. But you're absolutely right, and that's why we reached out to these three sources to say, how can we piece things together to keep the potential bond, if that's kind of the leftover, as low as possible. That is always the goal, is to make sure that any potential impact to our taxpayers is a low impact, if there's any impact at all. And members who've been on the board for a while will remember that when we first built the existing facility, the board did choose to subsidize this MRF for a number of years. And it was not an unusual thing, because it was, again, fit with the policy, the mission, and the vision and the values of the district to provide a local option. If there was not a MRF in Chittenden County for some reason, all of the recycling would have to be shipped either to Rutland if they could accept it, or out of state. And that increases the costs across the board tremendously. So having a MRF in the population center of the state truly does benefit not just Chittenden County, but all of northern Vermont. So, but Leslie, your point is absolutely correct, and that is what we're doing, is looking at these multiple sources, multiple resources. We have, these are the three that have risen to the top, but there are other grants that we've looked at. There's no money at the state. We have looked at other federal sources, whether it's through the Department of Energy, through the EPA, through rural grants, through agriculture. And we'll continue to do that and to try to piece together some different sources. So again, to keep that potential impact of a bond low. John? You're on mute, John?
For the prior slide, what was the assumption on the amount that would be bonded?
It was 100%.
$1 million bond?
So on 35,000 tons, it's the $18 million, and on the 50,000, it's $20 million.
Where I was going before, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay, good. What I was saying is, with the emphasis in Washington about the infrastructure, and we're looking at a project is absolutely applicable to what that law is supposed to be about. I would suggest we go to our congressman and push. We have a shovel-ready project, and when Obama did this 8 years ago, or whenever it was, 10 years ago, I was a school business manager, and we had shovel-ready projects, and we were able to get money for it. We could do the same thing with this. Congress is pushing through this infrastructure bill. The second thing I wanted to say is, you said in the chat box that we're doing 47,000 tons a year now. Why are we even thinking about 35,000 tons? I'm wondering, why wouldn't we make this big enough? And Milton did this years ago, where we oversized our sewage facility, and now Colchester wants to pump their sewage up here. And we're selling sewage, capacity. I could see us being the MRF for northern Vermont and make it big. It's the time. Congress has got the money. Make it. Let's not look at even 35. That doesn't even make sense to me.
So the reason
50 is minimal.
Yeah, the reason that we had we modeled both sizes is there have been some input at previous board meetings to look at that and to say, well, what would if we had to or needed to or wanted to just make this facility for Chittenden County, is it doable? There has been some pushback over the years for essentially functioning as a regional facility without the acknowledgement by the state that we are truly a regional facility. Chittenden County has always been the one that has stepped up to do these larger facilities because we knew that we could do it. And it has proven to be a benefit to other counties, other districts around the state. So there was a request by the board, or at least some conversation at the board level, to say, well, what would it look like if we only were responsible for just what Chittenden County produces? So that's why there's 35,000. But John, you're right. When we run the numbers for more than that, for 50 to, and I don't know that we'd stretch it up as high as 60,000, Josh, but we're very comfortable around 50. Then yes, the numbers make much more sense. The operating cost is lower. And obviously the revenue from the sale of the materials is higher. But that was why we showed the 35,000. It was just to be able to, again, inform that question that we've been asked a few years back.
And the last thing I'll say, it's 8:30.
I would like, thank you. I would like there to be a motion to put this on the table. And then if board members can concisely, if they're so inclined, to state why they are in favor or why they are against, then we can drive this to a vote and then move on with the meeting.
I move that the board authorize the executive director to launch the new MRF capital project.
John Gifford will second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the board would authorize the executive director to launch the new MRF capital project. Now's the time. I hope for any board members to speak particularly about their concerns about moving forward.
Well, I'd like to speak in favor of the motion. And I'd like to point out that I think I understand correctly that we are simply authorizing the next phase, which is an investigation phase. We are not committing to actual build of the project. We're only looking at how to do it, why to do it, how much it might cost, and we need to do things that get our ducks all lined up into an appropriate row. Some of what we've talked about tonight, I think, are a little beyond that at the present time. We need to just kind of start from ground zero and say, what happens if our present MRF suddenly collapses, that we're not able to do anything at all with it, let alone try and upgrade it or keep it running? That certainly would impact our revenue stream in a huge, huge way. I have here in Winooski had a deep involvement with the replacement project of the Myers Memorial Pool. And we had a pool that literally collapsed on us. It was completely defunct. We had to replace it or not. And that was where our discussions had to begin. We had to decide what we wanted, how big should it be, before we could even begin to talk about what kind of cost we were going to endure and what kind of cost we should try to curtail. So I think we need to just get on with this and launch the project so that we can get on to the next phase. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Other comments?
Paul
Staver.
Yeah, I fully support moving forward. One thing that probably a lot of commissioners have heard before, but I believe it's important that we continue to own a MRF, in that I believe it helps us ensure there's a competitive landscape in Vermont for this type of facility. So I think it's an important thing for us to invest in. And over time, I think it will absolutely be very much worthwhile.
Thanks, Paul. Other comments?
Kelton?
From talking with Eric, the town managers and the select board, Wilson's definitely in favor of going forward and looking at the project and what will come forward. One thing that or a few things I want to just clarify because I'm confused about looking at this schedule here. And what's been talked about. I'd definitely love to see just more analysis rather than just looking straight at the numeric of what that baseline is. I know the town of Williston, and really, I think a big piece is finding ways that doesn't affect the tip rate, because I think that piece would be a hard thing to sell to the select board, something that might increase the rate, and then also decentivize people from recycling, because it would push the cost of recycling even closer to the cost of trash. So anything that decentivizes people financially from recycling isn't something that I know I wouldn't go to them and support that. So I mean, that's just I would love if the scope of the consultant's report could include that, and maybe even RFP that looks at other potentials, like that letter we all received.
Thank you, Kelton. I want to ask a clarifying question to Sarah. Is money in the next year's or this upcoming year's budget for the consultant?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Hearing none, then I'll put the question. I'm sorry.
Well, I do have a question. The assumption was that we're going to bond for the full amount, and I'm just, our current cash balance is about 11 million, and I'm wondering why we're not looking at alternatives to draw down the significant resources that we have on hand.
Well, again, that is certainly one of the decisions that the board will want to make and to look at, and it gets to Leslie's comment about the kind of combination of ways to fund something like this. And yes, we'll want to take a look at, again, available cash on hand, capital needs not related to the MRF, to make sure that those are all satisfied for the long term. But this is a really important question, Tim, that the Finance Committee also needs to dive into sooner rather than later, and kind of start that conversation about reserves, having adequate, appropriate amount of cash on hand, and what those reserves are used for. So this is a perfect scenario for that conversation.
And we have a very well constituted financial committee with you on there, Tim, asking some good hard questions. Again, any other questions or comments before we vote on the motion?
Can you go back to the schedule, Sarah? It says on the second bullet, retain consultant to develop full design and construction plans and cost analysis. And then in the fourth bullet, it says July to December, develop conceptual and preliminary design plans.
Right. Josh, can you explain? I think the first bullet is slightly different or should be different than the second one. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, the first one, the July 21, the bullet you mentioned, the second one down, should be to develop a cost analysis. But this doesn't the other thing was, along the way, the board would be making decisions on these cost analysis. And the idea is, if we kept moving forward, we would retain that same consultant that would help us develop, what a construction and design, what design plans would look like, and then construction plans. So the idea is it's a MRF specific consultant, I guess, is what I was trying to say there. Is it somebody who could take us the whole way?
I think, Alan, the bullets need to be reversed.
Yeah.
Well, typically when you hire a consultant to do some of these things, many of these things have to occur simultaneously. It's just a matter of course. They look at things and develop different paths all at the same time. So that I don't see it as a problem.
Lee?
At what point in this timeline between, well, now that you're flipping everything around, I guess between or before permitting, do you come back to the board for a go or no go on the project after you have all the financials and everything?
You'd have that opportunity at the conceptual and preliminary design. The consultant's going to bring that to the board, and the board will be able to discuss and thumbs up or thumbs down at that point for sure.
Josh, is that jive with what you're?
Yeah, that's my idea would be if we can engage a consultant, with launching this project, engage a consultant, they start working on the financials, and we've done a lot of legwork on high-end conceptuals to bring that to them so that they can refine their cost analysis. I would, and don't quote me on this, but I would love to have something to the board by January coming up. Again, that's 6 months. This is an extremely truncated schedule, but something with more refined figures, something you can sink your teeth into and kind of parse through with the corresponding conceptual design. And that would be kind of step one to kind of go or move forward. And then they would take us, because at that point we would also have to start looking at retaining, or at least sending out an RFP for equipment as well, because we need to know, at some point, we need to know sooner than later what equipment provider we'd be looking at, which also would help further refine the cost analysis.
I'd like to suggest that there may be a little cart before the horse here, because the board is going to have to make a decision about the financing structure before you can go out and make a contract to buy equipment. I think we may need to review this and refine it a little better than what we're looking at, because we should have a notional time because the consultant is going to have a deadline to say, we want to bring this to our board by, mid-November, whatever, that has to be part of this timeline. And I think this timeline needs a little better work. But that should not stay that should not interrupt the vote that we have to take right now.
Okay, I'm asking, any further questions on this motion? Hearing
Call
none.
the question.
Who called the question?
Nolte.
Nolte, do we have a second to call the question? I believe calling the question requires a second.
Bryn Winooski.
Thank you. It's non-debatable. All those in favor of calling the question, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed to calling the question say no. The ayes have it. We're now back to the main motion, which is whether or not to authorize the executive director to launch a new MRF capital project. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay or raise your hand. Any abstentions? The motion carries. Sarah, you had a second action requested to establish an ad hoc committee comprised of board and staff to develop project-based public outreach and communication.
Right, I think that may be, to use Leslie's phrase, a cart before the horse. So let's, there's some time built into the schedule for that, so we can put that one off.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the compensation study presentation.
And that would be
item number 6.
Yep, thank you. Amy, if you could lead that off, please.
Yes, thank you. I do have Dan Lyons from Gallagher Flynn who's presenting tonight, and I did just talk with him. If the board would prefer to delay this, we can certainly do that, and he would come back at another time, or we can go through it fairly quickly. We're not asking for a motion tonight, so we're happy to present and just to do it and go through it.
I appreciate the offer, and as your new board chair, my sense is that at almost 8:45, it is getting late, and compensation is an extremely important matter. And we understand that the board is not being asked to take any action tonight, and that in fact the current compensation plans are in effect and will remain in effect per the approved 2022 budget. So there's, I believe, nothing urgent or pressing about this compensation study. On the other hand, we're not supposed to have a July meeting, so this would come up in the August meeting.
That's correct. And if the memo had pointed out, the next steps would be that we would like to receive comment from the board. So we certainly can do that between now and when the presentation, just on the information that you have. I'm happy to answer questions. Our next step is to bring this to the Finance Committee, and we are scheduling a meeting of the Finance Committee in July. The Finance Committee had concern with our current pay grade and step schedule, which provides a COLA and a potential for a step increase. And so they've been waiting to to see this report and look into it further. So the idea was that we would go to the Finance Committee with further review and then back to the board with proposals. We may change that and just go back to the board for the initial presentation and then come back again. But happy to do that in August, if the board chooses to do that tonight.
Again, I'm new to this. I would certainly want to hear from any other commissioners, make a convincing case that now is the time to get into this versus being comfortable with waiting until August to dive into this. Any comments from my fellow commissioners?
This is John Gifford. I suggest that we have the Finance Committee take a look at it. It's volunteering some work for us, and then come back to the board as the Finance Committee to say, this is what this looks like and what we should do with it.
Thank you, John. So I'll rule as chair that we will defer discussion of this item until the August board meeting. And we'll move on to the next.
I do want to just
item.
thank the consultant for hanging on for a couple hours tonight, and your appreciation and much appreciation. Be flexible to come at a later date as well.
Thank you.
It's no problem at all. I would agree. This is a really important topic, and it requires, I think, a lot of thoughtfulness. So I'm happy to accommodate as best I can.
Thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, everybody.
We will
see
you later in the summer.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Along.
Item number 7 is the Community Cleanup Fund.
Yes, and I've added Michelle Morris to the group to just again give a brief overview. What you have in your packet is what each community member has in their fund right now. There was a desire to have a conversation about the fund and its uses. We will be providing on a much more regular basis the updates as far as how much is remaining in everyone's fund. We will be providing examples of what the funds are being used for to kind of spark ideas in fellow community members. But there was a question that I think then you wanted to discuss regarding, what to do with funds that are kind of perpetually left unused. So I don't know if you want to kind of dive into some of that now, or again, if it's a late hour and we need more fleshing out.
Can I offer an opportunity to just be more directive?
Yes,
please, Brent.
Paul, you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
So I think the interest is less about what to do with funds that have been allocated to towns that aren't being used. The question is more when towns are at their ceiling and the additional allocation would not take place because they are at the ceiling. Right now, those funds are not put into community grants that, like container grants or anything like else like that, that communities can access. And the question is whether or not we want the funds to sit in reserves or go to the general fund, or to be allocated to those existing grant programs to increase funding available there for annual projects.
Thank you for the clarification. Yes, so the question is, because we always budget for the full disbursement amount each year, inevitably that does not get fully dispersed. So we basically fill up to the cap each year so that everyone is whole and at their max, or they are getting as much as they can in that 1 year. But we haven't, I don't know when, if ever, we've ever fully dispersed all of the available community cleanup funds. So I think that was part of the question, is that, say, in any given year, 19,000 or so is available, we may only disperse 10,000. Well, that balance is kind of left hanging and just gets reabsorbed back into the general fund budget. So that's the question, right? Is that the amount that is already budgeted doesn't get dispersed? Can that go somewhere else? Can that be used in some other way, as Brent indicated?
How much money are we talking about?
Michelle, do you have a sense, or Nola, do you have a sense for what might be left on the table for the current fiscal year?
Well, if we look at fiscal year 21, for example, we have a maximum amount of 19,000 that we would potentially allocate out to the various towns, and we awarded about 11,000 of that. So there would have been 8,000 remaining in the current fiscal year that could have potentially gone to some other fund.
John?
Yeah, what can the town of Milton do with $7,500? What am I allowed to do with that money?
Oh, we are happy to talk to you about that.
Right.
Recently, the board a couple of years ago expanded the parameters of what the fund could be used for. So I would suggest reaching out to Michelle and someone in her team to talk about the different options. It used to be very restricted, and it's much more wide open now. Michelle, if you could give a couple of examples of what towns are using their funds for.
I'm happy to do that. So it has been extremely, as Sarah said, varied. Just in the last couple of weeks, we have funded the cleanup of an encampment, a homeless encampment in Burlington, and Lee can speak to that. I also just put through approval for funding of purchase of food scrap drop-off buckets purchased by St. George for distribution to members of their community in an event that they were going to sponsor. We have used community members in Jericho and elsewhere, just recently actually in Winooski this year, used community cleanup funds to pay for the 50% match balance required of our incentive grant program. So we have an waste reduction incentive grant program where we'll pay up to 50% of the cost for purchase of recycling, trash, compost containers, for instance, for siting at a community park. And communities can use your cleanup funds to pay that 50% matching portion. So it's completely funded by CSWD. Those are a few wide examples. We also have projects, I think, that haven't been pursued as much, but I'm happy to help people talk through more creative examples if you need that.
I'll be in the town manager's office in the morning.
Underhill had a very successful tire roundup last spring, and it did a lot of good for goodwill for CSWD. People absolutely loved it. I guess I could frame this in a way. The question again, if the board has decided to allocate $19,000 per year for community support and finds that it has $8,000 left unspent, would we want to say there must be some other worthy community program that we could spend that money on, or are we just going to keep it? On a personal level, if I decided I was going to spend $500 a year on charity and I only spent $400, do I spend $100 on charity for myself, or do I continue to be a good citizen and fund some other program that is worthy? Just a way to frame, I think, the question as Bryn has outlined it. And I like that idea personally, that we allocate the money to some other community, worthy community activity.
So just to clarify, my recommendation is to make that available so the remaining 8,000 that could have been allocated that wasn't, in fact, dispersing that amongst the existing grant programs. So not awarding that to a specific community, but making it available through the existing grant and incentive programs to all communities that would apply.
Thanks for the clarification. Ultimately, I guess, are we going to need some motion on this to make a decision on what to do?
Paul, I think if there is interest in pursuing something that I'd like staff to get together and bring a proposal to the board for consideration at a future meeting.
Sounds like a good path forward. Item number 8, executive session. Is there anything?
I just have one more question on that. I had my hand raised. Didn't know if I should just speak up. Okay, so that's a cumulative amount of leftover from all communities. At what point throughout the year do we make that decision that, okay, we're going to take that lump of money and throw it into some grants? Because, I waited until today to submit, as Michelle can tell you, a lot. I mean, it was probably close to $6,000 worth of invoices, everything from roadside trash to homeless encampment cleanups. And stuff like that. So, at what point in the year would you think, a month before the end, 2 months before the end of the fiscal year? I don't.
And that's why I want to come back with a proposal, because I want to, have a conversation about some of the different ways that we could approach that. Because the goal is obviously for everyone to use their allotment throughout the year. So a lot of it, I think that we need to do as a staff team is to remind everyone that it's there and to be using it, in the fall and not waiting until we remind you in April saying, oh, by the way, and then it is a mad dash at the end.
Because it's a process for me to get the checks that have been reconciled and then saving my invoices and matching them all up and getting them all together to send in.
Right. Exactly. It's definitely a process. Nola?
We do know at the beginning of every fiscal year what total will be allocated out. So we've asked everyone to make sure that they've submitted their receipts by Friday so that we can reconcile our books. And at the beginning of the fiscal year, I'll know how much money of that 19,000 is going to go out to the towns. So we'll know what is remaining at that point, but I don't know, again, as Sarah mentioned, what we would do with that money and how we would make that work among potentially other grants or programs.
Right.
Yeah, so that's my understanding is that basically by July 1, the beginning of the new fiscal year, CSWD knows whether or not they're going to allocate $1,000 or the allotted amount to raise up to the ceiling or not. And so basically whatever the remainder is after that allotment would then potentially, depending on what the board decides, be reallocated to the existing incentive and grants programs. Because right now, if Burlington uses parses down your balance throughout the year, you don't get that $1,000 at another point in the year. You only have a chance right at the beginning of the year, at the end of June, moving into July to get that allotment. So that's why we have a remainder. That's why we have that balance, and allowing that to be that full whatever is not allocated by CSWD to the towns because they've reached their cap, that would go to the incentive. So really, we should know July 1st.
August 1st. Again, we close our books July 31 for the previous year. So in the off chance that receipts trickle in, we don't encourage that. We want you to get them in before the close of the fiscal year. But the reality would be we wouldn't have more certainty by August 1st.
Sure. The intent being the previous fiscal year.
Correct. Yeah. So we know how much to add, to bump up. But I think this needs to be written out, right? So in a plan. So that would be my recommendation, that we bring this back to you as a written document, as a plan, with some suggestions for where any of the excess may go, and then have a conversation about whether or not that's something that the board wants to do.
Thank you, Sarah. That sounds like a good plan. Moving on, item 8, executive session. Is there any reason to have an executive session tonight?
There's not.
Item 9, any other business to come before the board tonight? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
It sure is.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second?
A second is not required on a motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone opposed? All right, thank you. See you in
Good
August.
night.
Thank you. Good job, Paul.
You all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Night.
Thanks.